If my last video didn't attract enough controversy and attention from my detractors, I'm sure that this one might. Although by now I'm pretty sure I've scared away most of my detractors. And it's not because of my awesome debating skills or rational thinking, but rather because sometimes we just don't see eye to eye and sometimes they just get fed up and, well, things happen. But nevertheless, I do appreciate it if people who disagree with what I'm saying in my videos will say so in my comments and say why they disagree so that we could have a discussion over this. So, to my detractors, this video is really for you because this video is pretty much pointless for any atheist watching this. But by the title, you're probably going to guess my opinion on the matter, and you're probably just going to dismiss what I have to say out of hand, but I highly recommend that you don't do that quite yet, because I will at least try and justify my position of why I believe creationism cannot be defended honestly. So, lest I be accused of strawmanning a position or misrepresenting one, I will now, just to set the record straight, explain what I mean when I refer to creationists and how they differ from theists. So first of all, a creationist, at least from what I personally found, is someone who believes in the literal interpretation of the Bible and asserts it as a fact, while a theist might not necessarily go that far, and maybe some parts they might think are true, other parts they might think are more to be taken in a non-literal sense and rather to be taken as an allegory of some sort. Now, while all creationists are essentially theists, not all theists are creationists. You can still believe in a God, and you still can find the words in Scripture to be somewhat relevant to your life, just as long as you don't try and assert it as a factual event happening at one period in time. I am also a little more lenient on the idea of the existence of God. You can definitely believe in the existence of God, as long as you recognize that that belief is unfounded in anything truly factual. Now, what I'm going to say is going to offend a lot of you, but feel free to prove me wrong if you can. A creationist only has two options. They can either say something that's erroneous and based on some wrong misconception of a certain scientific fact, or they can assert something without any sort of backing in terms of empirical evidence. Because quite frankly, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any sort of empirical evidence put forth to at least even solidify the idea of the existence of any god, and forget about the Abrahamic one. Now, I can already hear you guys chomping at the bit and probably trying to bite my head off by saying that. And you can say, but wait, we have so much evidence to show you. Not so fast. And herein I feel lies the main dishonesty with defending creationism, is your standard of proof. Now, for something to meet my standard of proof, at least, it must fulfill two certain requirements. The first is that it must be verified through an official source, meaning an article off Creation Wiki simply won't do. The second thing is, and the most important, I find, is that it cannot be unfalsifiable, because that will automatically show that there is no way, one way or the other, to prove or disprove that particular assertion. Along with most of the unfalsifiable claims set by creationists, like the Kalam argument, which I just refuted, the ontological argument, which I tackled a long time ago, the atheist in foxholes, the teleological, etc. With that lies the problem that most of these unfalsifiable claims fall afoul of the reverse engineering principle. That is to say, if I took out the God in question of that argument and put forth another one, and that person wouldn't find that convincing, they really should not expect me or anyone else to find it convincing. It's just too bad that most creationists really do not understand that this standard of proof is a must for anyone who is A, skeptical, and B, in academia. So really, relying on subjectivity is another example of something that can be easily reverse engineered. For example, if you put forth the argument of, well, I know there's a God because I felt God's presence in my heart. Well, I could easily reverse engineer that argument to say that I felt the presence of the flying spaghetti monster. And I could be just as, my argument would be just as valid as yours, except I would put forth a case for the flying spaghetti monster. And any other god, that for that matter. Now, at least most atheists, especially the ones on YouTube, will sympathize with me here when I say I've heard many of the same creationist arguments time and time again. And they are the exact same ones with very few variations and very few surprises. And you know what? You really have to hold a double standard to not understand why we would not find that convincing. You have to be biased towards one direction to understand that we wouldn't find your argument convincing, and neither would you if you were standing from an objective point of view. So, interestingly enough, these arguments that you see a lot put forth by creationists are often the large majority both creationists and theists. Rarely are some creationists deists. So these arguments they put forth really don't prove theism. They, at best, prove deism. So why would creationists, for the most part, take the position of a deist and attempt to prove the existence of their God by taking the position of a deist? The answer is simple, of course. It's because the position of any particular god is extremely difficult to defend, so they must, by definition, it is a necessity for them to transmute their position temporarily into deism, and then by some flawed train of logic, somehow lead them to say that their particular god is the one that's real rather than any other. And yeah, I find this a fairly dishonest tactic. I don't know about you. Of course, I could point to many examples of dishonest creationists, but that wouldn't prove my point at all. My point is not to prove that creationists are dishonest, because some are, and more than others. My point is to prove that trying to defend creationism is impossible, at least impossible to do honestly. In certain areas like theology and philosophy, this is not necessarily true that their belief in God cannot be defended because, well, these ideas are very much out in the open. And they are up to criticism, and there are flaws that can be found in philosophy, but it's not quite as set in stone as the scientific arena, where if you don't have the credible sources, if you don't have the empirical evidence, then you really don't have a case. Now, this does not necessarily mean that you have to lie in order to defend creationism. That's not true. But if you're going to make a defense for creationism, then you have really two options. A, you can lie, and that would be inherently dishonest. Or B, you have to defend your position, in which the burden of proof will lie on you to provide proper evidence to do so. So it is actually very easy for creationists to just completely debunk this whole video. Just provide evidence that meets those two requirements, that it must be verified through an official source, and it must not fall afoul under the reverse engineering principle, and then you should be set. But I have yet to see such evidence, and I will admit such evidence is probably extremely difficult. I would say probably almost impossible to come by. But nevertheless, I will keep an open mind, and if any creationist feels the need to want to challenge me on this point, then feel free to let me know, and I'll try and respond. Thanks for watching, and may the truth always be heard.